07:09. A 19-year-old girl from Manila leaned toward a German ball kid during a changeover and said something that nobody in that stadium expected. She spoke German, not halting phrasebook German, not the kind you pull out nervously at a hotel front desk. Claude responded that 50,000 people stopped breathing at the same time, not because a match point was won, not because a serve clocked in at 130 miles per hour. Warm, natural, and fluent German, the type that only comes from years of true absorption. And Berlin, one of Europe's most historically significant tennis cities, completely collapsed. Telephones flew into the air. Strangers took each other by the arm. A woman in the front row covered her mouth with both hands as if she had just witnessed something that she wasn't sure she was permitted to see. Steffi Graf, the greatest German tennis player of all time, went entirely motionless somewhere in the stands, in the area designated for dignitaries and legends. This narrative is basically about that quiet. Because a legend becoming silent in the face of something amazing conveys more information than any prize ceremony could. Alex Eala is my name. When you're done viewing this, you'll know exactly why that name will be associated with this sport for the next 10 years, so keep that in mind. Let's start at the beginning because in order to comprehend that moment in Berlin, you must comprehend what it truly took to create a person who could do it. Manila, 2005. Alex Eala comes from a family that has first-hand experience with what it means to be an exceptional athlete. Michael, her father, was a professional tennis player, and he saw right away that his young daughter had more than just skill when he watched her move around a court. It was the kind of skill that penalizes you for not using it. Thus, the family took a choice that would be unimaginable for most families. When their daughter was still a young adolescent, they sent her all the way to Spain. Not to an informal training course. Perhaps the world's most rigorous and selective junior development program is the Rafa Nadal Academy in Manicure, a place where the standard is 12-hour training days, where homesickness is not addressed as an institutional issue but rather as a personal one. Ella didn't just survive it. She won the Junior Australian Open in 2022 and returned later that year to win the Junior US Open, where the children who survive typically go on to become professionals and the ones who don't still come out better than most. Open became the first Filipino athlete in history to win a Grand Slam title at any level, junior or senior. She accomplished this in secret, without the institutional machinery that typically catapults young players into the public eye, and without much attention from anyone outside the tennis community. The celebration of her titles, however, nearly usually overlooks this aspect of those years in Manicure. There was more going on behind the scenes while everyone was keeping tabs on her rating and watching her win bouts. Something unrelated to her match temperament, footwork, or backhand. In the strictest sense, she was becoming a global citizen. The Rafa Nadal Academy is a multilingual setting. Players from dozens of nations train together. Midway through a session, coaches switch between languages. In addition to physical adaptability, the local culture requires social, linguistic, and cultural flexibility. Eala took it all in. She traveled much throughout Europe during her junior growth years, competing in German-speaking nations and spending a lot of time in settings where German wasn't a foreign language. It was simply the way those in her immediate vicinity spoke. Her German lessons were not given to her as homework. She didn't have to pass a language exam. She simply listened. She paid attention. She seemed to be the type of person who interacted with people on their terms. Here's why it's so important. The majority of professional tennis players pass through a fairly small corridor when around the world. Repeat. Hotel, court, hotel, airport. They are not forming bonds with the locations they go to. They are going through them. Ella took a different approach. In fact, she let those regions to invade her. Furthermore, she wasn't traveling as a guest when she got to Berlin for the competition that would result in the most talked-about non-tennis occasion in recent women's tennis history. She was coming as someone who had quietly, unannounced, adapted to a language and culture that most people thought she would never really understand. Berlin was unaware of that at the time. It was going to learn in the most unexpected way imaginable. Here's something that casual tennis viewers tend to overlook regarding professional tennis. The psychological impact of shifts. They appear insignificant at first glance. Players take a seat, dry off with a towel, sip water, take a breath, get up, and start over. 90 seconds to recuperate. Ball kids work effectively and covertly as they travel around the court's perimeter. The audience moves around in their chairs. Nothing takes place. That's exactly what a transition is for. It is intended to serve as a respite, a reset, and a stop in between significant events. This is precisely why the events of this specific changeover in Berlin were so startling, so unanticipated, and ultimately so overwhelming. Eala was in the middle of a hotly contested battle, deep in the second set. Although the Berlin fans had been attentive and grateful the entire time, the mood remained typical of a professional game. Not electric, but warm. Around the age of 14 or 15, a little German ball kid approached Eala's end of the court to fetch a towel. Standard operating procedure. The type of exchange that takes place hundreds of times each tournament day at every location worldwide. It is hardly noticed by players. Usually, they are gazing at their racket strings, planning the next match, or simply attempting to lower their pulse rate to a level that is manageable. Eala raised her gaze. She also spoke instead of the customary non-interaction, the courteous nod, or the distracted half-smile that players usually give ball kids before turning away once more. In German. Natural German, friendly, and informal. In an instant, the ball kid's expression altered. It was almost disconcerting to observe how quickly the shock of being unexpectedly addressed gave way to pure delight. From Rose's distance, a broad smile appeared on her face. Fragments of the conversation were audible to those in the front seats. They looked at those beside them. The comprehension of what was happening traveled like a wave around the stadium as those individuals turned to face others behind them, each section catching at a beat after the one before it. The cheers didn't start out slowly. It exploded, a sudden, complete eruption of sound that had nothing to do with a match, a set being decided, or a winner being struck. It was the sound of 50,000 people falling in love at the same time. Perhaps the most illuminating aspect of the entire tale is Ella's response to the audience's response. She looked around the stadium with a look that was expertly captured on camera, one that was halfway between quiet enjoyment and genuine astonishment, as if she hadn't quite realized that talking to a youngster in a casual way would result in this, as though everything had been clear to her, and she was suddenly a little perplexed by how everyone else reacted to something she thought was quite normal. That was the point that absolutely opened the audience. Because anyone who was paying attention would have sensed it if it had been planned, if it had been a media-trained athlete using charm at a key point. Even if they are unable to express it, people can sense the difference between performance and genuineness. In that arena, they felt like someone who had just done the right thing at the time and honestly hadn't anticipated receiving a standing ovation. The video started trending on social media within 4 minutes of the playback. Not via the tournament's official channels. They continued to broadcast the game. Through fan pages, personal accounts, and the unofficial digital network that contemporary sports culture has created to deal with times when the broadcast is too slow to watch. In less than an hour, the hashtag Lagerman became popular in Germany. Within 90 minutes, the video was shared all over the world by Filipino fan communities, who are already among the most organized and fervent supporters of women's tennis. The numbers increased at a particular rate that only occurs when a piece of information doesn't need to be explained, when it transcends linguistic and cultural borders and has the same impact on everyone who sees it. Comments flooded in from all over. German supporters wrote about a mixture of pride and amazement that was difficult to distinguish. Long, heartfelt paragraphs describing what it's like to have someone bring your flag into places that weren't intended for you and just act as though they belong there because they do were written by Filipino supporters. Sometimes simply override your journalistic instincts, which is why tennis journalists who often oppose anything that detracts from the sporting event shared the video. The simplicity of one comment sliced through everything else. That was not necessary for her to do. That's all. That's the entire situation. That was not necessary for her to do. When it comes to human connection, the most effective gestures are nearly usually the ones that are not necessary. The ones that convey everything about a person's character at no expense in terms of logistics. Ella could have spent those 90 seconds sitting quietly. She had the option to gaze at her racket. She could have treated the ball kid as part of the background of her competitive focus, not cruelly, but professionally, just like every other professional on the tour would have. Instead, she decided to see a teenager who was performing an invisible task in her native tongue. In her own tongue. According to her terms. Without considering any audience, and this is the component that completely alters everything, the Steffi Graf element, because we must discuss the true meaning behind that statement. Graf didn't become the greatest German tennis player in history by accident. She spent 15 years at the pinnacle of the sport, winning 22 Grand Slams with a mix of physical prowess, mental discipline, and an almost unhuman level of competitive focus. She is the only player in history, male or female, to have won every Grand Slam event at least 4 times. She was the world number 1 for 377 weeks. She has a better understanding of what it takes to carry a sport on your shoulders, represent a country on a court, and be the person that an entire nation watches, waits for, and looks up to. Throughout her decades in and around this sport, Graf has witnessed incredible things. She has witnessed the rise and fall of champions. She has seen epic games, iconic performances, and moments that will go down in history. She is not easily frozen. She doesn't tend to show shocked emotion in public. This is the exact reason the video of her face at that transition is so amazing. Since she became frozen. Absolutely. Furthermore, she didn't have the kind admiration of a past champion observing a talented rookie player. Beyond that, it was something deeper and more ancient. It was acknowledgement. The kind that occurs when you've spent your entire life at the top of something and all of a sudden you recognize in someone else what most competitors never truly possess. The realization that being exceptionally talented is only half of what makes you truly important. That when there is nothing to gain from treating others well, the other half lives in how you treat those around you. Graf's excellence, discipline, and the sheer weight of her accomplishments made her an almost automatic spokesperson for her sport throughout her career. In those 30 seconds, she saw Eala do something quite different. She witnessed a 19-year-old choose presence over preparation, connection over comfort, and the ability to notice an invisible person and make her visible in front of 50,000 people without even trying. You can't coach that. The Manacor Academy did not include that in the curriculum. Character is that. And a woman who was at the top of her sport for 377 weeks knows better than anyone that the scoreboard only tells part of the tale, so she can spot character when she sees it. What does this all mean, then? Not in the game, not in the competition, but in the broader discussion about the nature of this sport and its potential. The issue of belonging has always been complex in women's tennis. Singing. Who is allowed to be here? Whose narrative is presented? Outside of the major tournaments, which faces are displayed on billboards? Which countries receive the significant funding for youth development that creates the champions of tomorrow? These questions are challenged by Eala's whole career in this sport. Her nation had never produced a Grand Slam champion. She attended a training program in a different continent. She picked up languages that no one asked her to learn. When she arrived in Berlin, she spoke to a teenager in her mother tongue out of instinct and just being herself. By doing this, she evoked emotions in 50,000 individuals that they had not anticipated when they arrived at the tennis court. She gave them the impression that the sport was more popular than they had thought. It seemed to have space for a greater variety of tales, faces, and champions. Steffi Graf froze, realizing what she was witnessing. She was observing the arrival of the future. Not very loudly. Not with a ranking breakthrough, a sponsor announcement, or a press conference. Silently. Within 30 seconds. Between a bald child and an adolescent. Alex Eala didn't plan any of this, even though the transmission almost missed. She didn't practice it. The impact was not calculated by her. She just spoke to someone she noticed. And that is what will make this sport remember her long after the scores have been forgotten. More than any trophy she has. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video.